Hello, everybody. My name is John McBride. Welcome to AI Agents Are Here. Are you ready? As most of us are aware at this point, there's AI agents everywhere in our code, in our services, even in our booking services and agents in the restaurants. They're everywhere these days. But I want to look at in this talk AI agents as part of our services, as part of our APIs, and how that works in the modern day and age of deterministic and secure services. So before we get too far, we have to understand what is an AI agent. And you'd be surprised thinking about what these things are with human operators as well as these sort of agentic operators. And really, in both cases, no matter what services you might be using or working against, in essence, they're both working in some sort of deterministic loop of some kind. And AI agents specifically, they live in this loop that is constantly doing these kind of validations. LangChain, your MCP clients, Python, all of these really, even in Claude Code, in Claude Desktop, all these LLM providers now have a lot of these agentic capabilities. Really, in the end, the way I like to think about it is they exist in these long form validation loops. And it's really no different from how you and I today, working on services, working on code bases, would think about, testing a little bit of code, gaining some validation on that, or building a little feature, getting some validation on that, having a bug, validating the bug, and then going and fixing it. It's a very, very similar sort of loop. So on the left side here, we have our sort of harnesses. This might be something, again, like LangChain or something you're coding in Python, an MCP client, and then the actual large language model on the right side there. And those two in conjunction kind of exist in this long-running validation loop. How that actually looks under the hood is you're always starting with some sort of input for like a ChatGPT kind of client or something that has an LLM behind the scenes. That input could just be, hey, go and do some task for me. Now, that task needs a tool decision, and most of these agentic agents are going to be using a subset of tools that they have with them that they've been hard coded into the Python code, into LangChain, into MCP, any of these things, that then the LLM will use as the piece to actually go and generate the JSON that'll get used when we actually execute that tool. So we've made a tool decision. The LLM is then going to understand the schema and spit out a bunch of JSON essentially. That JSON is then going to get validated against, whatever harness that you have. Again, maybe that's LangChain, some Python code, MCP, whatever. And then that schema, once it's been validated, or I should say, once that JSON has been validated against the schema, then we can actually call the code, in essence, call that actual functionality to then close the loop on the input, giving it back to the user. Maybe the user says they want, something different. They want some more work done, whatever this might be. This loop is very important to understand when it comes to AI agents. And anybody who's built one of these things before, who's built something with LangChain and tools in LangChain, this will be immediately familiar, where you're actually going to take that input, make a tool decision. The LLM is going to generate a bunch of JSON. That JSON is then going to be validated. We're going to use that validated JSON, or really arguments, to then call the code. That code that gets called is then going to loop back into the input, and around and around and around that validation loop goes. So thinking about an AI agent, it's important to understand how these are actually different from human operators, really, or other user agents. There's all different kinds of users agents out there. There's people on your browser and your services. And in today's day and age, now that we understand these AI agents, there's these different kinds of user agents doing things on your services. So how do these differ from the humans that are using our things, our services and technologies? One very big important one is that they are non-deterministic in nature. And this is sort of a machine learning concept where given some massive swath of parameters, you can't always be certain that input A will always be output B. It's not a straight function, unfortunately, given the way that these graphs and the neural networks and the transformers and everything work. You can't always be certain that you'll get the same thing out that you put into it. So it's non-deterministic in nature. And because of that, they can break or be broken in very unexpected and kind of bonkers ways. So it's very important to remember that these things might not always behave. And maybe one could say, just like normal humans, they might not always behave how you expect them to behave, and they will break and be broken in weird and wonky ways. They are very persistent. So persistent that you might be surprised how frequently and often one of these things is utilizing or continually utilizing your service or your thing wrong. They're persistent in a way that can even be self-fulfilling, where it continues and continues and continues and then breaks because maybe there's some context rot or the agent got caught up in a weird loop or something. That persistent nature can be an interesting marker of an AI agent, as well as something to keep an eye out for. The non-deterministic nature of this, I really want to hone in on because this is different from how, over the last 20 plus years, we've built things with APIs. APIs in their very nature are very, very deterministic. You are very certain with good CRUD architectures or ways that you have the structure of your HTTP APIs or even gRPC or any of these, GraphQL, any of these, they just work, and they work in an expected way given your client has the right implementations and your APIs have the right implementations. So this, in a lot of ways, sort of breaks this paradigm in this new non-deterministic agentic world with your APIs. But it doesn't have to be that way. And I think that actually AI agents really benefit from good old-fashioned API design. In my opinion, APIs are still the future, and they are still a really important part of AI agents today, utilizing our services and our things, and also continually being well working and good for the future. So let's hone in on this and how you can prepare for that agentic future today with the mindset of probably a lot of your existing APIs. I'd imagine that a lot of people listening to this talk are obviously interested in the security aspects of, securing your APIs for AI agents, but also making some just good old fashioned changes that make things a little easier on the front end for you. So detecting agents. This is something that, may be a bit of a hot take, but detecting agents may just be a fool's errand. There's a lot of sort of just back and forth and what maybe people would call like a war of attrition. Think back to like web scrapers or robots.txt and how that just kind of never worked. And, today we just have all these AI agents and bad actors out in the wild doing different kinds of things with scrapers. Won't get too much into that, but it may be actually better, instead of spending a lot of engineering effort building technologies and building things that would sort of block and keep AI agents out, you would instead embrace that future as more and more people, more programmers, more consumers end up using AI agents to do everyday things. Now, that being said, there are some really excellent technologies out there. I would point you towards one, which would be various AI firewalls, as well as sort of these gateway services that can make it easier for you to understand what types of user agents are utilizing your services and make a business decision from there. The next thing that can be really powerful is using some kind of API catalog and a good deterministic way to declare your APIs, which today that's really just OpenAPI. Having a well-formatted OpenAPI doc, as well as the catalog to understand these things, can make really everybody's lives easier, the developers' lives easier, human operators and agents' lives easier, as well as AI agents' lives easier. So let's look at what that means. Agents may autonomously decide to use your APIs, be it through some kind of harness like MCP or A2A, or just if they have like an HTTP client connected to them. They may like find your APIs out on the internet and go and decide to just use them. So having a good catalog and everything structured really well in OpenAPI can mean that you can give these AI agents sort of the full picture of how to do things. And as long as your OpenAPI doc is more or less correct, they should then have a clear path to using your APIs without getting stuck in some weird persistent loop where they're like erroring on a bunch of different things and the schemas aren't being validated correctly because they read something weird from an old version of your OpenAPI doc out on the internet. Yeah, avoid that, because that can just be very confusing for, all different types of people trying to debug why things are going wrong, the AI agents themselves, human operators and the developers. Having a good, structured catalog and your OpenAPI doc makes just a ton of sense. And again, this is all just like good old fashioned, API sort of 201 kind of concepts. The next thing that makes a lot of sense in that regard is a gateway. A gateway is really the kind of front door to how you can provide consistent auth, policy, even programmable policy that you use, the governance aspect where you might be having certain kinds of API key policy for certain kinds of users, or even providing that AI firewall capability on top of your gateway. It's a very, very, very good choice to adopt an API gateway. And shameless plug, Zooplo provides an API gateway where we're building a lot of this AI agentic stuff into it. So go and check that out. An OpenAPI native AI API gateway, Zooplo, makes this very easy, because then you can integrate your existing catalog, your OpenAPI doc, a bunch of that stuff end to end. So not only can you, make things just understandable by being able to view the catalog and understand it from the AI agent's perspective, but also from the developer perspective as things get built end to end, from policy to API keys, all the way through to documentation. It just makes a lot of sense. Now, speaking of a gateway, authentication becomes a huge part of this. And this is kind of one of those things that, maybe is a bit like on the fringe. Like, we're still discovering and figuring out how to do this. In this talk, I put this as an open issue. And some communities, like the MCP community, are adopting OAuth and different formats. I know that A2A uses OpenAPI's security format to, publish how different agents can be accessed and authenticated with. But unauthenticated APIs are obviously very easy to use, but also are very easily abused by AI agents. And that should come as no surprise to anybody. This is not anything revolutionary, that an API that is just open and out there ready to be used is going to get scraped, is going to get utilized in probably some weird and nefarious ways that you don't anticipate just opening it up out there. So get an API gateway, put some keys on it, and lock it down if you need to, if it makes sense for you and your business case, and then start to create policy around how you can enable the various agents and clients, potentially AI agents and clients, to go and utilize your stuff. So I'll be very curious to see how this evolves across AI agentic spaces. Not just in MCP, but kind of in a broader sense. There's a concept that a lot of people like to talk about where it's quote unquote human in the loop, where we still want to enable humans really to make these authentication and authorization decisions. Maybe with MCP and plugging something into like Claude Desktop, you've seen, these little like approve buttons pop up when you're using tools or various services. And that, I think, is going to continue well into the future, where those humans continue to be in the loop, making these real authentication authorization choices. So keep that in mind as you build your services, that it probably makes a lot of sense in your APIs and your services to have the human in the loop, regardless of AI agents being used. All right, so getting a little deeper into this is the object level authorization. Authentication and authorization in APIs, they always go hand in hand. And you want to, lock down your APIs in a sense that you have good API design, but you're not just like accidentally leaking out things or having overprivileged authorization. Again, long-lived creds can be a really big problem with AI agents that can be persistent and just live in these endless validation loops as they try to do just various different things. And if you have really poor object level security and authorization, you're going to have a problem where in those endless validations loops, they find secrets and things that they really shouldn't. And this is classic, like, user A shouldn't be able to see things that belong in private to user B. And if that is a very thin veil, that, AI agents will just try all different kinds of things. They'll try different permutations of query strings. They'll try, I once saw an AI agent trying a bunch of different permutations of an API key until it just got it. And it was just going round and round and round and round until eventually it was like, I've been successful. I'm like, how were you successful? You didn't actually have the keys to this. Well, it just found a key and it got there. It had some key in its training data and it just kept going and going and going. These are the things that are like the nightmares of security professionals around the world. So lock it down, have really good object level authorization and authentication on your APIs and your services. It makes a ton of sense in the AI agent future. We mentioned schema validation. This is huge. If you don't have schema validation, AI agents just aren't really going to work. I think very, very important to that agentic loop, a good, strong validation loop. Strong checks for potential malicious use is really important here, where if they're providing a bunch of weird, wonky stuff, and you're just getting constant schema validation, that's probably a good tee off that you have something weird going on and you might want to look a little deeper, maybe configuring the WAF or something on your services to block those kind of requests after a certain number of failures. But schema validation is both very important to enabling agentic loops as well as detecting that weird and malicious use. All right, rate limiting. We're just trucking along here. Rate limiting can be really good just in any case, but because these AI agents are non-deterministic, they can, again, get stuck in that loop. So considering different kinds of operations where, maybe you don't want an AI agent just spinning and spinning and spinning on a bunch of different things on your APIs, just eating up resources and services. And instead, you maybe could provide these bulk batch operations in your APIs that make it a lot easier for them to have a way that they can do it, once every 5 minutes or so, depending on use case, business, all that stuff. Bulk batch operations, I think, will continue to be more and more popular. We're already seeing this with services like OpenAI. They have a bulk and batch inference API. So yeah, that could be a really great way to go about it. But good old-fashioned rate limiting, especially with these agents, these AI agents that live in a loop, can be really, really critical for not just completely thrashing all your resources. Okay, so error handling is also, again, these are just like some very basic 201 kind of things. In your APIs for your responses, this is essentially the dialogue between your service and the AI agent. And a lot of frameworks like in MCP and LangChain and some of these harnesses make it pretty easy to surface the right kind of error messages to AI agents, those really actionable types of error messages. An example would be like the JSON that gets generated by an AI agent getting sent to your service. And if you can provide a really good validation message that's like, oh, you missed, I don't know, like UUID for this user, please provide this, it's required. That's a good actionable error message for your service to then go back and communicate that with the agent. Yeah, don't include internal details. That probably goes without saying. Again, we have to go back to some of these first principles and these basics because the way that a lot of these things are getting built just seems to be throwing a lot of caution to the wind. So remember to not expose yourself, especially to these persistent, often breakable and the non-deterministic AI agents by providing a bunch of internal details, because those will be continually used in security attacks going into the future. Now let's pivot away from what do we do today, and look at the future. And some of this starts to get into futurology of a bunch of this stuff. And what does it look like to start embracing the agentic future? Because the world is weird and it's only going to get weirder. And services and businesses, we need to embrace that weirdness, but also, protect our business, protect our assets, and think about what that future might look like. And one very hot take might just be opening up your APIs. We mentioned that API keys are obviously great. They make authenticating, authorizing a big part of a whole service and API picture, but it might make sense for some of your APIs to be a bit more open so that you can enable AI agents to start utilizing your services more, especially if you have the capacity for it, to then be more ubiquitous with sort of the agentic future. This gets a little bit into agent search optimization, I think is what they're calling it these days, which is a little different than just search engine optimization. But if you can make your service and your thing more ubiquitous for these AI agents to use, and makes more sense in the training data for them to utilize your services, then that's maybe a good business decision for you. Something to think about. It's a little bit of a hot take, but maybe opening up your APIs is a good idea. Use case driven docs, I think, will be something we start to see. And this is really away from, you know, beginning, middle, and end kind of documentation where a human might be reading this thing, and instead starts to get into how can an AI agent, which already has, you know, the breadth and depth of all of the internet and everything it's ever consumed, you know, maybe minus your service or your new programming language or your new thing, how can it search really easily, find a use case very quickly, and start to go and take action against what you've documented? So this is something to think about in how you write your docs, how you structure your docs, how you make your docs searchable and discoverable, and tailor making that a little more for an AI agent. One good use case here is maybe providing an MCP server on top of your documentation that just has a single tool that's like search, or even like a couple tools that have various use cases for it that you can actually then feed to an MCP client, which has that LLM behind it, to then go and do a bunch of stuff. And this definitely makes a ton of sense for like developers. Developers will want their AI agents being able to search use case driven docs more to utilize those in ways that make sense. Now, self-service AI agents, I think, are not here yet, but are probably not that far around the corner. These things will go and like do things automatically. They're already doing things automatically and autonomously, but we need to enable them to self-service some things to be even more autonomous and even, you know, do even more things for our services for the people that, you know, are trying to get stuff done. So if you have on your website like, hey, email us to like get an API key, or, you know, why don't you reach out to support to sign up or something, like, I would argue those days are done more or less and happened for a while, but are even more painful today because AI agents are going to skip right over that. They're not going to try to email you and wait, you know, a week to hear back from your support reps to get, you know, set up with stuff. They're going to move on and be persistent and try to finish the task by going and using a self-service platform or thing. So having capabilities in ways that your platform can be self-serviceable, I think, again, will be very important going into the future. Now, Model Context Protocol, I think, deserves its own slide, and is one of these things that I believe is going to be big, even bigger than it already is today, continually going into the future. This seems to be the way that AI agents and platforms on the client side are interfacing with a lot of services on the server side or on the API side. We fully embraced this at Zuplo, where we make it possible to expose your current APIs through MCP tool calling. We built an open source library called just at Zuplo MCP. Go and check it out. It's been like my my project for the last little bit. But this is an open source library that you can build server side, API side, modern day browser request response MCP servers. So this is what we built and bundled and open sourced into Zuplo, and I think will be big going into the future. So Model Context Protocol, I think that is going to be like a requirement for a lot of services going into the future, especially anything that maybe and probably will be used by an AI agent. Yeah, Model Context Protocol, it's big. The other ones maybe to keep an eye on would be A2A, which is Google's agent to agent, which can sit alongside MCP, and then potentially many others. It wouldn't surprise me if, you know, continually going into the future, there were just more and more of these as Model Context Protocol maybe has worse use cases. Yeah, that is the talk. Please feel free to email me if you have questions. I'll be around on the internet here to answer any of those questions, but thanks for coming to this talk. Thank you, everybody.